Our final speaker is from Texas A&M University, John Ragusa. John is a professor in the Nuclear Engineering Department and Associate Director of the Institute for Scientific Computing. And he's going to be talking to us today about A&M's NuSTEM projects.
Hello, everyone. Do you want me? I can turn on my video really briefly so people see me. Hello, that's me. I have several kids at home, and we all are using the internet for work and school. So I'll bring back the video at the end for the Q&A. I will try to share my screen next. Let me know if everything is working fine on your end.
So we can see your presentation and you are in presenter mode. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So as was mentioned today, I will give you an overview of the NuSTEM project and our recent advances. So NuSTEM stands for Nuclear Science, Technology and Education for Molten Salt Reactor. It's a consortium between 3 universities, Texas A&M universities, the University of Wisconsin at Madison and the University of California at Berkeley. And listed there, you see all of the co-PIs part of that project. I'll give you a little bit of a history of the genesis of NuSTEM. So it started in the call for proposal for NEUP fiscal year 2017. There was an IRP, integrated research project related to grand challenges for nuclear energy. That IRP in the call for proposal was also to do some prototypical project to show engagements of DOE, international engagement of DOE with a project at the NEA, the Nuclear Energy Agency. And that project is NEST, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this later. So NEST, Nuclear Education Skill and Technology Framework. At that time, back in, I think, early fall 2016, I think there only had been one MSR workshop at that time, maybe the one in 2015, and there was about to be the next one in 2016. And MSR, molten salt reactors, were started to be on the radar. And I did my master thesis on MSR a long time ago, so I decided to put a team together on MSR. And the goal of the NuSTEM project is basically to deliver science results for the advancement of molten salt reactor, and of course, as a university project, to train and educate nuclear reactor expert, and here in the present case, molten salt reactors expert. So the NuSTEM project is divided into basically 5 research tracks, and you see the different pictures and co-PI associated with each track. Basically, it's 3 thrusts. The first one, we call it data and system evaluation, in which we have subcategories of modeling and simulation, cross-section measurement, and thermohydraulics. The second one is material and corrosion science, and the third one is chemical technology, in which we work on sensors and waste form. And we also have one educational track. So the 5 thrusts are represented here, with the system evaluation and data represented in blue. Again, modeling and simulation, thermohydraulic cross-section measurement. Here, what we want in that track, what we want to do is basically develop tools and models specific for MSRs, apply data science for rapid design and optimization of reactors, and evaluate system performance. In thermohydraulics, we do VNV of CFD models, and we investigate the use of heat pipes for passive heat removal. In the fast spectrum, for fast spectrum system, we also analyze and measure the chlorine-35 NP cross-section. I'll tell you a little bit more about this later. In the next big thrust, the one dealing with the material and corrosion science, we perform a corrosion test with unirradiated and irradiated alloy, and we characterize material. And finally, in the chemical technology thrust, we deal with a waste stream, what's going to happen to the salt once used, how to dispose of, and as I mentioned earlier, optical and chemical sensor development. So what I will do next is I will dive a little bit in each of those topics for each of those thrusts. And we have prepared some research vignette. I will not have time to go into the details of every single research vignette, but I think the slides will be posted and you can always reach to us for additional detail if needed. So under thrust number one, data modeling and simulation thrust, we are divided our work as follows. We do high fidelity modeling to really get a good handle on the physical phenomenon happening inside a molten salt reactor. This may be costly in terms of CPU time, and therefore we use data science, in this case reduce order models, to obtain a much faster but still of good quality simulations. We perform system analysis to evaluate MSR on life cycle. As I mentioned, we do thermohydraulics and heat pipes as well, and cross-section measurement. So now I will dive into the research vignette of each of those areas. The first one is high fidelity modeling for multi-physics simulation. It's led by Dr. Frattoni at Berkeley. And basically because MSR have unique features that current tools cannot model yet, because current tools have been mostly tailored for light water reactors. And here I'm talking about soil compressibility or delay neutron precursor drift outside of the main part of the core. We have to use high fidelity first principle tools to do this. And some of the key findings that that I can briefly mention here is that we have used such tools, basically a combination of a high fidelity Monte Carlo Serpent code called Serpent for the neutronics. And we have used an open source library for the CFD. That open source library is called GenForm for generalized nuclear foam. It's based on the famous, well-known open foam toolkit for CFD. And we have been able to model the delay neutron precursor accurately, and we've benchmarked this against the MSRE data. More recently, we've been working with the effect of soil compressibility and what happens in reactivity-initiated accident. So one of the picture here, you see the different effect, whether you take into account soil compressibility or not. And this can have quite a drastic effect on the power released. So this is another phenomenon that is important to take into account. Some of the picture here that you see, they're not typical of MSRE. Those are for a fast reactor calculations. We have used the molten salt fast reactor from the Euratom project Samofar. In the second thrust, we basically do data science, and in this particular case, model order reduction for multi-physics simulations. I am the one leading that effort, and basically when you have to do high fidelity simulations over and over, like when you want to do design optimization or do uncertainty quantification, that can become quite expensive, especially if you rely on first principle tools. So we have developed technologies for model order reductions of multi-physics simulation for molten salt reactors. In a nutshell, basically what we do is we derive a low-dimensional representation of complex systems. So just to give you a few numbers, instead of solving problems that involve 1 million of unknowns, for example, we can reduce them to a few dozens of unknowns. So you can see the drastic reduction of unknowns. When you do this, of course, you can approach near real time and do things that people start to call digital engineering. It can be applied to many toolboxes, even black box code from industry. So it's quite a powerful technique. In the picture that I show is it's basically the MSFR, a parametric study on the MSFR where we don't know exactly the fluid viscosity. We let it range in a certain parameter range, and same thing for the pumping strength. And the reduced order model can predict with accuracy, with errors less than 1%, the full order simulation. What we'll be doing soon is move on to the reduced order modeling for the MSRE and for the 3D version of the MSFR shown below. In the next research vignette I will be presenting, it deals with system design and analysis led by Dr. Svetkov. In that effort, he focuses on MSR resource utilization and system-level evaluation of MSR. The ultimate task is to assess optimization options to minimize environmental risk. So here we're talking about waste stream. Some of the pictures shown here include the thermal system used and the fast system used for the MSR. Do you see, if I move the mouse, do you see it?
Yes, yes, we do.
Excellent, thank you. In the figure here where my mouse is hovering over, the analysis account for soil variation, including corrosion, gas generation, precipitation, and basically overall composition effect due to spectral fluctuation as example. And in the bottom figures, you see the assessment of fission gases produced as a function of in-core condition and spectral features. Still under modeling and simulation, we have a computational fluid dynamic track led by Mark Kimber. And in this track, basically, we want to assess whether system code, you can think of a code like SAM or RELAP, that basically use 0D and 1D correlations, whether they will be appropriate, they can be appropriately modified to handle MSR systems. So the objective of the area is to take into account high fidelity turbulence modeling and assess whether current correlations used in system code are applicable or not. So they use a various range of CFD modeling approaches from RANS to DNS. And some of the examples shown here, for example, early work compared to the experimental data from the MSR times. Here they considered a wide range of material property correlations as found in the literature. Moving the mouse here, you can see what picture I'm pointing at. And basically you found that there's a large variation even when you use the same turbulence model based on the physical property that you used. And this is quite a large change. So there's definitely a need for studying this. In their most recent Reynolds average Navier-Stokes simulations, most of the correlations are always assume a fully developed flow. And you have therefore good numerical comparison against the experiment. This is this figure here. But in reactor system, you are very often in the developing region of the flow, not in the fully developed flow. And errors of up to 30% can be noticed. So there's a need to further investigate what is going on with turbulence modeling in those systems. And finally, one more aspect of thermohydraulics, we are looking at the use of heat pipes and including them in MSR systems. Basically, the principle of heat pipes are summarized in the little picture at the bottom left. But the goal of our studies is to create design tools that will enable heat pipe technology to be used for MSR applications. So we want to identify scenarios where heat pipe could be useful. And we are designing some 0D quick simulation tools to determine the operating limits of the heat pipe. That's the figure at the top. And we are also moving to multi-D simulation of heat pipe design and geometry, as you can see from the effective resistance illustration at the bottom right here. And finally, simulations without data sometimes is not that useful. So we have also spent a little bit of time in year one of the project looking at chlorine 35 cross sections. And the importance of this is it basically relates to the level of purity required in chlorine 37 for fast spectrum MSR applications. So our experiments have shown that the N-alpha cross sections agrees well with what is published in the literature. However, the NP reaction is much lower than what is available in the evaluated nuclear data files. And therefore, this could be an area to further investigate this. So our experimental results are currently being processed in the X4 database and should be available in the ENDF library soon. Another large thrust of the project is material irradiation and corrosion science. As we know, the reactor system needs materials, and it's important to understand how those materials interact and be affected by the coolant and the radiation field. In most of our studies here, we're focusing on using what was identified as a promising candidate from the times of the MSRE, basically alloy N is the material that we are currently studying. In terms of the study that we carry out, basically we mix the strength of the Texas A&M Ion Irradiation Lab and the University of Wisconsin at Madison Corrosion Study Labs. We care about element loss, crack initialization, boundary segregation, precipitation, hardness changes, void swelling, and so forth. So I'll dive a little bit into what these two groups are doing. So the group at Wisconsin is looking at the interactions between test samples and test environment. It's crucial to understand how those behave from a static corrosion test. And some of the results include the strong effect of a dissimilar material that can lead to mass transport in the salt system. So for example, when nickel 201 is placed in crucible of stainless steel 316 and we make sure that no galvanic couple is present, there is a significant mass transport of iron and chromium from the crucible to the nickel samples. So this can have important implication on how one designs a corrosion experiment for an MSR. Another effect that the Wisconsin team tested is the effect of salt volume in your experiment. So when all experiments use the same salt at the same temperature for the same duration in the same geometrical setup, but with crucibles of different surface area and salt volume ratios, they were able to note that there's a relationship between the amount of salt used in the experiment and the observed mass changes in the sample. So whether this is due to the lower overall impurities being consumed or corrosion product saturation that is slowing down or stopping corrosion is still being investigated, but it's a crucial element as well of what we do. Eventually, our goal is to evaluate the effect that irradiation has on corrosion in a salt environment, namely whether radiation-induced segregation can be realized in alloy N. Finally, materials in MSR, we should remember that they're always being corroded under irradiated environments. So we're actually performing in situ irradiation and corrosion experiment of commercial alloy. And we want to know if the competition between radiation-induced segregation and corrosion holds true when this is happening simultaneously. The team at Texas A&M is dealing with a fundamental irradiation and corrosion study for material development for MSR. And this one includes several parallel tasks. Our key interest is to identify factors which influence corrosion. Two such factors are stress and radiation damage. And that will help us to develop new materials and processing technique to improve corrosion resistance. So a few nuggets on this task. One of the tasks is to study the effect of stress corrosion, the stress on corrosion of alloy. And this is achieved by using a 3-point bending of alloy N and corrosion comparison of the different regions under various stresses. Another item is to study the effect of irradiation on the corrosion of alloy N using proton irradiation to induce dislocation in the network. This dislocation not only changed the mechanical property of the materials, but also caused complicated elemental segregation. The sample after corrosion shows cavity formation and chromium precipitation. And the third task that is also quite interesting is basically a surface modification or a coating. So we applied the nickel layer on top of 316 steel to study the corrosion resistance after material has been coated. And finally, the last research thrust that we have, we're dealing with chemical technologies here. So here we're looking at salt waste form and what is the outcome of the salt once used, how to dispose of it. We are also looking at sensor development, online sensor development for salt composition and chemical state. And we are also proposing in the next month a workshop on sensor and chemical analysis, and I'll give you more detail about this in 2 slides. On the salt waste form part of the research, this is led by Dr. McDavid and Dr. Luis Ortega at A&M. So the question asked is, what is the proper disposal of the salt once you have once you are done using it? Of course, a lot of the salt component can leach into water and environment. So there's definitely a need to understand what is the proper waste form for the salt. If component of the salt, as shown in the table here, are already leaching into water, one can easily think that if fission products were in the salt, they will also be released into the water environment. So there are multiple waste form pathways that have been proposed, but in our case, we focus on the fluoride apatite, where when FLIBE salt, we're using FLIBE salt, reacts with 3-calcium phosphate. And you see some of our pictures of our salt. So bottom left, FLIBE as synthesized with impurities once we purified the FLIBE, and then a pellet of FLIBE that has reacted with a TCP, tricalcium phosphate. On the sensor part of this research, this one is led by Dr. Ragusa at Berkeley, and it deals with the development of chemical sensors, as well as the development of benchmarks and standard methods for chemical analysis of fluorides. So quickly 4 bullet points on what's going on here. Ragusa's group has been developing a stable thermodynamic reference electrode for the electrochemical analysis of FLIBE. They use square wave voltammetry to quantify oxide. As you know, the avoidance of oxygen gas bubbling will enable a clear signal, and the application of fast pulse makes the technique well suited for online monitoring. Towards the middle here, you see the microfabricated film chip sensor, where they use physical and chemical vapor deposition and photolithographic processes. The sensor will enable the precise tailoring of electrodes geometries and a single droplet experiment. And finally, electrochemical reaction cells has been integrated with ports for gas control and analysis. For example, using GCMS, we can obtain electrochemical and gas analysis at the same time. This will conclude the overview of the research thrust that we are performing under NuSTEM. I would like to take the opportunity to advertise, unfortunately due to COVID, it's a virtual workshop for chemical sensor technologies for molten salt reactor and fluoride salt cooled high temperature reactors. You can see here the website where you can sign up for the workshop. We ask you to sign up before November 2nd. The workshop will be November 12 and 13, 9 to noon Pacific time. And we welcome anybody who wants to take part into that workshop. And very quickly, I wanted to mention, I wanted to focus on the on every single of my co-PI as their contribution, but I want to reiterate that the different component of the project worked under some integration, for example, you can see the different arrows. Some of the arrows go both ways. You see how the different parts are moving together. And the central focus is all of the different parts help modeling and simulation. I mentioned earlier that there was an educational trust because there was this project was a prototype to interact with the NEA and the NEST framework. So some of the things that we have done on the educational side is we have in summer 2019, when people were still allowed to move, we had a summer boot camp on MSR. We did this with our partner Samofar, the Euratom project that dealt with the safety assessment of molten salt fast reactors in Europe. You can see the different modules that we taught. It was lecture plus exercise and capstone project topics. So it was not just having the student being passive. We wanted them to be really engaged in our boot camp. Recently, the DOE, along with the Natural Resources of Canada, jointly applied for a NEST proposal to the NEA. We were granted that proposal in fall 2019. McMaster University in Canada is leading this, and the NuSTEM, this project, and the Samofar institutions are co-lead of that proposal. We already had an SMR hackathon 2 months ago. The website is presented here. It's not a typo, it's an SMR hackathon. The project deals with SMR, and the molten salt reactor is just a subcategory of the SMR. So it's not a typo between the S and the M. And again, we had lectures in the morning and students working in the afternoon. It had to be an online cafe. We did it that way due to COVID. Just to wrap things up quickly, we have created 3 new courses. They're listed here on this slide. We have added a lot of lecture content and modules, 26 total at all of our 3 institutions as part of this project. And I will now finally conclude. It's a research and educational project at the university, so a key element is the student outcome. We are currently, or we have, over the last 3 years of the project, we had 18 undergraduate students involved. We funded 12 graduate students. We also had 6 other students wanted to join in us and work with us. They were fellows. That means that they had funding from other sources, most of the time NUP fellows or NRC fellows. And we also had cross-pollination through our research group. So another 19 graduate students were or are involved in our project. In terms of scholarly output, we have 11 journal articles, 10 conference proceedings, and 13 abstract summaries. We have a web page. It's here. If you want to take a look at what we do, you can visit this web page and have a very long list of the references that we produced. Maybe the font is too small for you to see, but the slides will be available later. I hope I wasn't too fast or too slow, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So we have just 1 or 2 minutes to get through. You do have 8 questions, so if we don't get through all of these, I urge you to take the time to go into the Q&A and answer them through text, because they're all very good questions. I think the highest impact one that I'm looking at, Joanna asks about if you would be able to point towards some of the papers. You have that long list of references, but she's specifically interested in the fission gas generation. Also wanted to ask how sensitive your thermal hydraulic results are to the value of viscosity, given that we do not have good data for viscosity for these systems at high temperatures and under increasing burnup.
So I think there's quite a variation in terms of the effect of material or fluid properties on the CFD calculation. I don't know if Mark Kimber is present on this MSR, but otherwise I'll refer Joanna to Mark Kimber. I'll take a screenshot of the Q&A. There was another question I forgot. Where did it go? I'm looking at the screen right now.
Sure, you're happy to, or you're welcome to pick a question if there's one that you can answer more directly.
But before that, you were mentioning the paper. So I think the MSR workshop will put our slides online at some point, right?
Yes.
And therefore, the very last page that I've shown a few seconds ago, you will be able to see all the publications so far. So is the study focused on a particular salt? Not necessarily. Our studies focus on what is currently available in the different university labs. So at Berkeley, it's FLIBE. At Texas A&M, it's FLIBE. We are authorized. We have all the HEPA filters to do FLIBE work. I think at Wisconsin, they have different salt, but I think they're using FlyNac. And I think Adrian Coué may be on the call right now. So if I said something wrong, I don't know, maybe he can chime in, but I think Wisconsin is FlyNac.
Okay, thank you so much.